1078 officer in need.
What's up, guys? It's Matt from the 1078 Project. Hey, if you're new to the organization, a little bit about us. The 1078 Project is a non-profit organization that's been founded and developed by law enforcement officers who have been involved in critical incidents and officer-involved shootings. Our goal at the 1078 Project is to provide mental, spiritual, and practical support to law enforcement officers as they navigate the difficult times surrounding an officer-involved shooting. With that being said, let's dive into today's episode, and I'll see you on the other side, boys. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the 1078 Project podcast. Today's guest is a former SWAT operator, team leader. He has worked for both big departments, small departments. He's been involved in an officer-involved shooting. He's a victim of compounded stress from law enforcement, which led him out of law enforcement and to his new passion, which is My Arena. He travels the country talking to police officers about the risks associated with mental health in law enforcement and how they can navigate the difficulties surrounding law enforcement. Today's guest is Travis Gribble. What's up, Travis? Welcome into the 1078 Project podcast. How you doing, man?
Good, buddy. How are you? I'm all good.
I'm good, man. I'm excited to have you on. I've been following you on social media, and I love what you're doing. I love the transition that you made with My Arena and everything you're doing with that. And I'm sure we'll dive into that pretty extensively in the future of the podcast. But I just want to kind of start the podcast off by getting who you are as a person. And you know, if you listen a couple times, you'll know that we kind of started your childhood. So I'll open the floor. I tell everybody if I say like 3 words this whole podcast, I'll be a happy man. So my goal is for you to tell your autobiography and tell your story. So I'll kind of open it up there.
Yeah. Pretty basic childhood. Grew up in Michigan, actually. Middle class family. Played sports. Baseball, football were my 2 main focuses. I was anywhere from when I was younger, worked or lived in the bigger city, and then ultimately ended up moving out to a small town just north of Lansing, Michigan, to go there to play baseball for a coach that I'd been playing for. Through some all-star stuff in the summer, just typical. Sports back then was a whole lot different than it is now. I got connected, went up there. Parents were divorced when I was, younger, 5th or 6th grade. I guess things kind of started, turning sideways. So I was mostly with my mom. Graduated from a very small high school, DeWitt High School, and I'd always kind of had an interest in, kind of law and order and stuff, but I didn't really have. Everyone always wants to know, like, hey, what attracted you to law enforcement? Whether family and law enforcement, I didn't have any of that. To be quite honest with you, like I said, very big into sports in my area. I saw a lot of the dads. They worked for General Motors at the time when it was hot and heavy in our area. We're Lansing, Michigan, and Flint, Michigan. I mean, the factories were everything, and all of us youngsters, that's where we wanted to go work because those were the guys that had the nice houses and had the fancy trucks. So yeah. I actually, even at one point, had put in, back then it was so hard to get into General Motors, you had to have someone sponsor you. And really? Just to get thrown into a lottery to see if you'd get get into the hiring process. And I didn't make it. Thank God I didn't. I know I wouldn't have lasted in a factory, but obviously we've had some of the demise in that area, the General Motors, but what had happened was my mom and I were living in this small town, and we lived in an apartment complex. And my senior year and shortly after, I kept seeing next to our building in this apartment complex a police car show up. And, come to find out the guy was coming home for dinner at night, worked in that area. And we just started striking up conversations, and it just evolved from there. And he finally said, hey, do you want to come do a ride along? Maybe this is something you'd be interested in doing. And I did. And I can honestly say that after that first shift, I was hooked. Wasn't anything crazy. And also I'm growing up in the era when Cops was big on Saturday night. the TV show.
Yeah.
But it wasn't anything big. It was like a couple of domestic violence calls. I think we took a drunk driver, to jail that night. And I liked it. Liked the excitement, liked even the camaraderie of seeing the guys like meeting up for a cup of coffee. I just liked the atmosphere, I guess what it was.
Yeah.
And then that kind of did fit. If you would ask my family, they said, yeah, you were always kind of a law and order kid, definitely black and white, wanted justice, that kind of thing. So it kind of fit, I guess. But yeah, I started going down the track to go to school. And back then, so this was the mid 1990s when there just wasn't a lot of jobs open.
Yeah.
In fact,
super competitive.
Yeah, man. Like, it's so funny watching what's happening today. Which literally, if you're a police officer, where do you want to go in the United States? What kind of department do you want to work for? Versus back then, there'd be 3 positions open and 600 to 1,000 people would put in for those 3 positions.
Yeah.
So just super different than what it is now. So I did some little jags here and there. I had some good jobs, so I kind of paused at school. Because in Michigan, what you had to do, if you weren't being sponsored, which was rarely happening by a department to go through an academy, you put yourself through your own academy. And that started by getting an associate's degree at a community college. And then the last, I guess it would be 6 months of that, so the final semester, you were in the academy to finish that degree.
Okay.
And so I did that. So I'm paying my own way. I'm not getting paid in the academy. I remember sitting next to one person in our whole class that was getting sponsored by a city department there. And I was angry at times. I'm like, son of a bitch, I'm paying my own way and they're actually getting paid right now. But it is what it is. And yeah, so after that, in Michigan, as I think it is in a lot of states, so as soon as you graduate, you're trying to get that job right away, because when you get the job, it locks in your certification.
Yep.
So all these little teeny towns would come to our academies to recruit that pretty much had their whole force was part-time, because obviously they're not having to pay benefits. They can pay them lower wage. So sure enough, I got picked up by a little department, 1 square mile town in Michigan, and I started working there the night after I graduated the academy. So
really?
Yeah, but all you're thinking is, hey, I locked in my certification and my pay was $6 an hour. So that's what I was making. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, man. But back then that was, well, for one, I probably would have done it for free back then. But now I look back and I'm like, holy shit, that was kind of crazy that they were only paying that much. But it is what it is. They had their full-time people were the chief, 1 sergeant, and 1 full-time officer. And then they had a rotating crew of part-timers, and all we did was work the weekend shift.
No way.
Yeah.
Man.
So
that's insane. What was the academy like for you? So it sounds like your academy story is pretty similar to mine. Same exact thing. Law enforcement was super competitive. I think maybe 2 guys in the class of like 25 had jobs. But what was the academy like? Did your dad, was he ever in the military or anything? Did you? Nothing
Nope.
like that.
So
that was your first exposure to like a paramilitary environment.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, we wore blue pants, white shirt, tie, inspections every single morning, workouts every single morning, which usually entailed what they used to do back then: run all the time, run. That's all we did. It seemed like, and yeah, very very militaristic. So where inspections, very formal. We did not sleep there, but we were, I don't know, by the time night trainings, we even had sometimes on Saturday, because a lot of Saturdays we would go to the range once that started. I mean, we were putting 50, 60 hours in, then of course all the studying and preparing for the exams after that. So, inspections. I mean, just little things, man. I don't know why this stands out to me, but I specifically remember one day in inspection coming through, and one of the cadre there, they saw a nose hair and they literally ripped it out while they're doing inspection. And your eyes water and you're like, what the hell? But attention to detail. Or if you had threads somewhere, that's why you learn how to burn your threads off. You don't show up. You got to have those shoes polished and all that stuff. So But it is good, I know, or at least I hear, well, I thought before I left the profession that academies were getting a little soft at times. I don't necessarily agree with, because I guess the discipline is for a reason. Attention to detail is for a reason.
Yeah. And the expectation is even higher now.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's all really important. I understand due to recruitment and all that stuff, standards being lowered, or I don't understand. I don't agree with that. I understand that's why they're doing it. I don't agree with it because at the end of the day, someone just texted me not too long ago. It was about the entry. I can't remember what state this was. The entry physical fitness test, and they lowered it. And they were literally showing a video, and it's so easy.
Yeah, I just seen that the other day too. It was,
did you? Yeah.
I want to say it was like Detroit, and they were saying that they would like waive all the physical fitness.
Yeah, and maybe that's cool, but I think I responded to whoever sent it to me. I said that's all cool until that person gets punched in the face for the first time and realize they're in a fight for their life. Then they'll realize why the physical fitness standards are what they should, what we want. So
yeah, if I remember correctly, they were also saying they would like take care of your warrants. Like if you applied for, they would like take care of your warrants. They'd figure out your warrant situation. It's like, is this really what we're coming to in major cities? Is that
it's crazy?
We're getting people's warrants taken care of so they can become the police. It's just bizarre.
Unbelievable. But
it makes no sense.
So different. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what what year did you start?
I went to the academy in 2011. So it was
So
very,
I mean, even since you've been just a ton of changes. So imagine even myself, mid 1990s, the changes that we've seen.
Yeah.
And I don't ever try to say like, you can't ever change. I understand everything's going to evolve. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of changes that I don't necessarily agree with that I think that have hurt our profession. And as you look back in the rearview mirror, like I can now, you see these little changes here and there that, you take one little piece and then the next thing it's this next piece. And before you know it, you've got a whole structure there. We completely changed how we used to do policing. So.
Yeah. And I think like you were talking about earlier, it doesn't change the standard in which the public has set for law enforcement. It doesn't, just because you make the physical fitness test go away doesn't mean that the public doesn't expect the same things out of police officers. Right. Or just because you expunge people's warrants doesn't mean that the public doesn't expect that the person that they're dealing with acts a certain way, carries himself a certain way, operates a certain way outside of work. And I think that's the scary thing for a guy that's in law enforcement that is trying to do things the right way. It's like you start to see some of the people that are coming into law enforcement. You're like, this guy and me are not the same. Like, we're not the same person. We don't have the same belief system. We don't have the same morals. And like, he's not representing me or the guys around me the way that I would like them to the public, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. In fact, you just said something a couple minutes ago about, you said the expectations are even higher. Yeah. So if the expectations of the public are higher, shouldn't we be increasing the standards to a higher level? But again, we're separating further and further. Standards for us are getting lower. Expectations are getting higher. I mean, I even saw little stuff. I mean, when I promoted and went back to in Mesa, Arizona, where I ultimately retired from, I had a good group of hard chargers, and I would see it, and I didn't even necessarily, not like I would come down on people, but there would be certain officers like, hey, I don't want them around my calls because they are not up to my standards, and really all it's doing is causing me a lot of problems. And, who am I to argue with that? Like, if I'm seeing these things, and then, yeah, man, I mean, there'd be little things like I try to challenge before someone for fit for duty because their physical fitness is out of control. It affected one of my people during a fight. But you try to touch that, and HR is like, nope, can't do anything. And, and again, it's not coming down. You're not going after the person as an individual. It's like, hey, I know what it's like to be punched in the face. Hey, I know what it's like to have to use my weapon because someone's trying to kill me. Like, this is the day you need to be prepared for. All this other stuff, day in, day out, yeah, you can say, oh, everything's fine, nothing's going to happen. But when that one incident, that one call comes where you're going to be challenged and tested to see where you're at, that's what you should, in my opinion, be training to that level. That's what you should be shooting for. So,
yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know what the answer of it is because I think without society kind of turning around and allowing us to grow as a profession and move in the right direction, and the pay increasing and the standards increasing, you're going to continue to get the same candidates. And I'm not saying every guy that gets into law enforcement today isn't, a great dude,
Right.
or doesn't have the capability of being a good guy. It's just when you set that standard so low, that's
Yep.
a huge leap in order to be the policeman that I think society expects, and I think that I expect to work with.
Yeah, agreed.
It's a bizarre, I don't know, man. It's such a weird thing to be in that place and to currently be in law enforcement and watch it happen in front of my eyes. Go from, a single position, you got 75 people, 85 people putting in for a single position. And now I taught at the academy a couple weeks ago, and everyone in the class had a job before they left. And they were like, oh, what about this place? Or should I leave this job to get a job at this place? Is this place better than that place? And I'm like, oh my goodness, man. Like
Yeah.
I would have died to have like one job offer leaving the academy. You guys are like picking and choosing which police department you want to work at. It was kind of infuriating, to be 100% honest. But
Yeah.
So getting out of the academy, you started in Michigan.
Yeah.
Your first department, how many people? You said 3 full-time officers?
Yeah, 3 full-time, and then I don't know how many part-timers we had, maybe 6 at that time. So I only worked there for a few months and then got on a full-time job with the sheriff's department. Still not very big at all. I think when I left there, 15 people maybe on the road, and then we ran a jail too. So small, but everyone always asks, like, hey, what was that like compared to where I did end up to? I'm sure we'll talk about Mesa. So really good for gaining experience. Small department like that, you got to do everything. You take the case from beginning to end. You're dusting for prints. You're doing the interviews, all those types of stuff. And you don't have backup, 2 seconds away. You are learning how to deal with situations that you find yourself in. It taught me how to deal with people, like in a conversation, how to de-escalate. I know that word gets overused, but you know what I mean? Like trying to hey, be smart about the situation here. Like you don't have much, like how can you work this? And then, it really opened my eyes. I would not have seen it then, but I do now looking in the rearview mirror, what that's like working in the area. I lived in the area. So I lived in the county where I patrolled, and, obviously my thing now is mental health, like dealing with a suicide where I know the 18-year-old kid that just put a gun under his chin and I have to tell his parents that I know, or pulling people out of a car accident dead that I know, those types of things. You're never really being able to get away from the call. You go to the grocery store and you're like, hey, know that person, or I arrested that person, and just a whole different level that, quite honestly, when I started that job, I'm like, oh, this can be cool. I live in the area I work, this is the part of the community. Now, I would not want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, to be quite honest with you, because I think it's good for us to be able to completely separate from that environment. And now living in Montana, where I live, and working with the departments across the state here, some of the stuff I do, it is heavy on them. Like every tragic incident that they deal with is somebody they know, or at least, are very familiar with, an acquaintance, whatever it is. So it's an interesting thing, but I will never discount the experience. Kind of where I got my SWAT bug, because we didn't have, when I started there, we didn't have any sort of tactical team. And the only team that we would use was the state police. They call them emergency services, ESU. And so, it would take them a long time if there was a SWAT call out, some barricade or search warrant, to get them up and running. So our sheriff and some other chiefs in the county decided, hey, we need some sort of containment team, quick reaction force, whatever it is, that can hold down the fort. So I did get my feet wet in that. Not a ton of call outs, but learned how to train, got the bug, started from scratch, created policies. So that was good. Tons of experience, and still very dear friends I have back there in the area. It's where I got into my shooting, which is a whole big thing. in 2005. So it taught me a lot. It gave me my foundation, man.
How old were you when you first started there?
24. Yeah, 24.
That's still relatively young.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about when I stepped in I was like 21 years old. I had like pretty limited life experience. I was like brand new, like, and I just remember like I think I'm going on my 12th year, looking back at that like young, immature Matt, like going to, the suicides and going to all the hot calls and like, man, how did I ever process those things? Like as a young kid, and maybe it was best because I was young, because I didn't, like, I don't know, it never really seemed to bother me all that much whenever I was younger. But for you being 24 years old and trying to navigate those relationships with, like your community members and the suicide situations and stuff, how difficult was that for you?
Yeah, man, you bring up a very interesting point, because back then I would have said, 24, I was plenty mature enough. And I've even seen some states talking about lowering the minimum age to 18 to allow police officers. And so I have a wide, again, 24 years in law enforcement. So I've got a lot of opinions formulated of what I've seen. So when I first got to Mesa, there was a lot of young people that had started 21 years of age. And I would see them and kind of just like what you just said, like, hey, they don't have a ton of life experience, and you could see some of them having difficulty dealing with calls or even just having a conversation with someone. That I always thought, man, it would be really beneficial if like you'd went out in the world, maybe work something different, and then come into the academy. And unfortunately, and I sound like the old dude on the lawn out in front bitching about all the young people, but it has gotten worse. And I mean, I have two boys that are 19 and 20, and I even see it at them to where bring up the freaking crazy phone and social media where they're plugged into that a lot versus just being able to come up and have a conversation with someone. So I started to see it even getting worse at Mesa, where like you can't even have a conversation and you're so nervous, you stumble your words, all these things. And you think about the responsibility that's placed upon us. So I look back even myself at 24, man, like, again, we didn't have any preparation. No one told us like, hey, just so you know, the first time you walk into a room and you're ducking out of the way of brain matter, that might get you a little bit and it might be a shock factor. Instead, you're walking in there the first time like, oh, this is what it's like. Never expected this, or like, holy shit, is that whatever it is, or you're stepping in it or you're smelling it. And so I would, and recruiters will hate me, but I would love to see our, a little bit older coming in, go get some life experience, whether that's the military, I remember, man, one of the people that, so funny, one of the best cops I ever saw, prior to coming in law enforcement, he was a grocery store manager. And so you think about what that involves. It involves like dealing with, situations, dealing with employees, dealing with the public that may not always be happy with you, and learning how to navigate those situations in an environment where you don't have to have a bulletproof vest on and a gun because someone may want to kill you.
Yeah.
And learn how to just deal with difficult situations. Then you can translate that into, law enforcement. In fact, one recruiting thing I thought this was pretty good on their part about being creative. Phoenix in Arizona, they had put out a recruiting video. They were highlighting how people from different professions can come into law enforcement and succeed. And one of their highlights was actually a female that was a hairdresser. And they talked about how she had learned to deal with customers, have conversations for a long period of time, not afraid to talk, and how that related to her job now on the street. Now, of course, we have to do all the other stuff, add in the police training and all that, but that foundation to be able to handle yourself professionally in a tense situation, I think is gold, man. So, and I do
your
see some
ability to
recruiters.
Communicate.
Oh, totally.
Just your ability to talk to someone. Just 95% of our job is talking.
Yeah.
95% of it is talking to somebody. It's just different environments. It's talking to somebody when they're upset, talking to somebody when they're mad, talking to somebody, when they want to fight you. That's 90% of your job is talking to somebody. The thing that we do the most, the tool that we use the most is our mouth over everything else. So a hairdresser, like have that awkward conversation in a chair over and over and over and over and over again, would probably, as long as you are willing to fight and you're willing to do all the other stuff that comes along with it, probably pretty successful.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, man, I think life experience is huge. However you can get that, I think is it can be very helpful. But I also understand it is not lost on me that the recruiting situation is in places in dire straits, and they just don't know what to do, and they'll take, unfortunately, anybody that's willing to come and squeak through the backgrounds and squeak through the physical fitness just to get them in the academy and see if we can get them on the road. So.
Yeah, I work for a suburb of St. Louis City, and St. Louis City is a pretty violent area, and I want to say 400 officers short, somewhere around there. And dude, and I didn't believe it. I thought it was nonsense. I was like, okay, come on, like they can't be that bad. And one of the guys that I know that worked there sent me a picture of their locker room, like their quartermaster room. And man, it stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of uniforms, like hundreds and hundreds of uniforms. But then, I asked myself, why would a guy go there? Why would you go to that city where the city is not behind you? You know what I mean? Like the city council and the administrators of the city, and not necessarily the police department administrators either, because they're getting pressure from politicians and everybody else in the community to be, pretty tough on their guys. Like, why would a guy want to go work there?
Right. No, I agree. I mean, I know when you're talking one specific agency, I know there's been a struggle with Austin. So I have a couple officers reach out to me and just, they have some precincts that don't even have people on patrol during certain hours of the day because they can't staff it.
Wow.
And so, I mean, but I still see they're graduating. I don't know what the number should be, but they're still putting people through the academy. They're still getting people to come on. But it is a struggle. I don't know. I would venture to say that every major city in the United States is probably understaffed right now, and struggling to keep those numbers filled. So I don't know what the answer is, man. We need good police officers, for God's sake. So I hope someone comes up with an answer and we kind of right the ship here and start doing things, getting them back to where we used to be. So
unfortunately, I think the answer is just time.
Yeah.
It's time, and it's the trust of politicians and in society. That's really what it is. It comes down to those two things. And because there were times in my career where the general public was pretty supportive of law enforcement. Pre-2014, 2016, the community was fairly supportive of law enforcement. And then obviously, again, I work for a suburb of St. Louis, and Ferguson is right down the road, and we were the center of racial injustice for the last 5 years, 6 years or whatever it's been. Yeah. It's been a wild, wild ride.
Yeah.
But if it gives you any confidence, it seems like we're kind of over that hump, and things are starting to settle back down here. So it'll probably, since we were the center for racial injustice and the DOJ came in and everybody else, the rest of the country will be probably another year or so behind. But it seems like things are starting to kind of settle down, and people are getting tired of the procedures and things that got put in place that caused, the city that I work for now to get 12 to 15 stolen cars a night. It's we did a bunch of things trying to limit our interaction with the criminal portion of society, and that has come back to bite us in the butt with all the stolen cars and home invasions and everything else that come along with that. So, do you remember your first hot call, like the first call you got that kind of puckered you up?
As far as any type of incident, or where I'm going, or a criminal, or what do you say?
Anything, like the first time as a new cop that you got a call and you went to it and you're like, oh my goodness, what did I just get myself into?
Yeah, actually, it was the first weekend that I first started with that small department. And so we were surrounded by a county, or in a county that the sheriff's department, obviously, it's, again, kind of rural, so they didn't have, people always in the same area. So a lot of times we'd venture out and they'd ask us to go check on a call. And the first one, and I can still picture this call to this day, they said, yeah, one car accident, and it was on a dirt road just outside of where this little village that I was patrolling. So I went out there. As I get to a certain point, I can see, like, man, that looks like a fire. And so roll up on scene. There's nobody there. There's no one standing around the car. And I'm like, I wonder what happened, like, where's the driver? And as soon as I get out of the car, a very distinct smell that I did not know at the time what that was, man. But now I will never forget it. And, I got as close as I could, but I could see through the flames that there was someone still sitting in the driver's seat. And yeah, one car accident, ultimately ended up finding out, it was a DUI thing, but that smell. And again, as much as they would try to show those things in a movie or TV, like, until you're witnessing it happen, is something that, again, how do they prepare you for that? But yeah, that was, and it's not anything that I ever kept me up at night or anything like that, but that was kind of the big punch in the face, like, holy shit, like, we're going to see some stuff. And yeah, that was the big thing. My first big one that I can remember, that I still, can, as I'm telling you, I can remember myself pulling up to this call and seeing that car on fire. So yeah.
Did you have any formalized field training there, or was it kind of like you went through the academy and they just threw you out there?
So yeah, man, this is a joke because at the time I thought it was cool. But yeah, the very first night, so it was Saturday night, I walk in there and the chief and the sergeant are there and they're like, hey, here's the keys. They tossed me keys, and it's the keys to a brand new Chevy Caprice with the Pt.1 Corvette engine. It's probably my favorite patrol car ever. And they said, just don't wreck the car, and here's our phone numbers. If you need us, call us. And I was out and about on my own. So no real training, man. But I don't even know. I honestly don't know how I navigated that. But I did, and I survived. I'm not in jail or anything like that. So it worked out, I guess. And then, when I finally went to that sheriff's department, then they had the normal field training process like it should be. But I don't know, man. I can tell you that stuff still kind of goes on here in Montana in certain departments. Before you even go to the academy, you can be out there patrolling. So
really,
it shocked me, and as I look back at it now, I'm like, man, those people were crazy. Like, as the academy is what it is. You memorize stuff to pass exams to get on to the next process. You do some scenarios. But at the end of the day, man, that's not how it really is on the street, in my opinion. Real training starts when you get out there in the mix and have to actually deal with people, that aren't role players. And that's when it really starts. So I didn't know anything. And they gave me the keys and let me go.
You never see somebody arresting somebody like the old PPCT way. It's like, put your hands up. Like, there's a way that the academy teaches you, and there's a way that you do things in real life. And those two things are pretty different from each other. They're not anywhere close to the same. And
I quickly found out, like, they didn't like my style of policing, because I was like, all right, I'm gonna take people to jail for drunk driving, whatever. And I don't know, a few weeks into it, the chief pulls me in. He's like, you got to simmer down on your traffic stops because you're pissing off some people in town. I'm like, oh, why? Like, well, you're arresting too many people for drunk driving. I'm like, oh, not anything I ever expected. But yeah, just small town politics of like, hey, that's not cool. Just be cool, go. So it is what it is. But again, great learning experience as I look back on it.
Yeah. So you moved over to the other sheriff's department, and that's a little bit bigger of a department. Yep. What were your aspirations when you first got into law enforcement? What did you really want to do?
Man, I think when I started, I just wanted to work the street. When I got out there, I was just patrol. I loved working traffic. I loved handling calls. I mostly, throughout my entire career, liked working night shift, just for the fact of that's when most of the stuff happened, So
crimes in action.
Yeah. And then I quickly, probably once I got in, then I knew, like, okay, watch how sergeants operated, and like, okay, I think I maybe would want to promote someday. And then quickly, so 2 weeks into working for the sheriff's department, we had an officer-involved shooting there where one deputy, one lieutenant, they both were trying to do a traffic stop to arrest this dude on a warrant. They knew I had a warrant. He's kind of he was an anti-government person. They did not feel comfortable going to his house, but they knew him. He was known to just be a knucklehead. They both, as they make the stop, he comes out with the SKS rifle and lights up both patrol cars. It's the deputy who was in front in the head, doesn't get out of a seatbelt, hits the lieutenant in the shoulder, blows his shoulder up. They both ultimately end up surviving.
Really?
Yeah, but they didn't know what to do with me because I'd only been 2 weeks on in the FTO process, and then my FTO was actually best friends with the deputy who got shot in the head. So they actually ended up assigning me to the hospital with that deputy that got shot in the head just to be there. We did not think he was going to make it. He ultimately pulled through, and I credit that experience, as horrific as it was, to how from that day forward, how I looked at how I was going to handle everything from a tactic side of things. Yeah. I put myself through my own training. I did extra firearm stuff. I just, it was good for me. Not that they didn't teach us those things in the academy, but I think when you witnessed it, and then I sat in the hospital with this dude that was on life support for a while, and I'm like, oh man, this is real. Like, I better be on my game, switched on every time I, check in and go 10-8. That it changed my whole outlook, how I did things and how I wanted other people to do things, quite honestly, that I wanted everyone to be on the same page. Like, hey, again, preparing, like what I said, preparing for that one moment in time that you will be challenged, that it may be life or death. I think that's what we should all be training for. So,
your Super Bowl moment.
Yeah, so that is a great way to characterize it. That Super Bowl moment. All this other bullshit, I can go take a civil dispute. I can go whatever that is. These mundane stuff that comes with our profession, retail theft, whatever, and they're gone. I don't know, but that Super Bowl moment where it's on, and that person that just assumes see cops dead, you have walked upon them, and it's time. So it kind of shaped me.
Yeah. What was it like trying to go back to work after that? Did you struggle at all, or?
Did. So it was a big deal in our community. It did not happen very often, and it was a 2-week manhunt for this guy. He got away. He ultimately ended up getting killed by a state police sniper in the northern woods of Michigan. He had went out in the middle of nowhere and was trying to survive. As I look back in the rearview mirror, it was a big gut punch to the whole department. And of course, back then, even this happens now, there's no mention of mental health assistance. No, like, hey, we're going to bring somebody in. There's no debriefs. Everyone just went on. It was like, catch him. Okay, he's dead. And then we just went back into doing things. And like, even my FTO, man, I'd only known him for 2 weeks. He came back a different person. And that was his best friend. Just ornery, just hateful, just never really got over it. And I saw a couple guys that went through that. And it's unfortunate because, there was no talk of, hey, guys, let's gather up. Let's talk about what this might do to you all and have a conversation. So,
what year about do you think that was?
Oh, man, 1998, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, so you were like nowhere near this whole movement of mental health. Like that's back when cops were just expected just to
suck it up.
And still, like you said, to a certain extent, there's departments all over the country that handle things exactly the same way. Administrators that handle things exactly the same way of like, hey, what did you expect? You're a policeman, get over it.
Yeah,
and like
exactly.
To a certain extent, man, I can relate to that, but you are a policeman. You did sign up to be part of this, but at the same time, I think we should probably do certain things in order to help you get back to the same person that you should be, rather than just, having guys buried at the
and I don't think
bottle.
Yeah, man, and I don't think it's going to change you. There's no preventing that. But I think understanding how to navigate those changes versus you just think that something's wrong with you, or you don't want to tell anybody because, hey, how's this going to be looked at? Am I weak? That's the difference. yes, you did sign up for this, but we also, you hired us, so we would like you to help us navigate this process as we go throughout our career, both
100%.
for ourselves and our families, right? So
100%.
that's the difference.
I think you said something that 100% true, is that when you go through these things, man, you're not going to be the same person. You never look at the world through the same lens.
Yep.
You will always look at the world through, that police officer's lens. And we view the world just differently than everybody else, and there's a reason behind that. You're not expected to be exposed to this much trauma and for, to be the same person that you were when you're 24 years old first getting into law enforcement.
Hey, so and it's interesting you say that. So when I got into my shooting in 2005, that guy that I told you about, that was the one that offered me to go on the ride along. So he calls me after that shooting because he worked, in a neighboring county. And he said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "All right." He says, "Well, welcome to the club." I'm like, "What do you mean, man? Welcome to the club?" He said, "It's not good. It's not bad." He says, "It's just a club because you're never going to be the same. I just want you to know that. Like, dude, you're going to feel some things. You're going to look at the world differently. You're going to look at every call differently from then on out." And so back then I was like, I don't know if I understand it. Now, completely understand it. And why he said that.
Yeah. And in my opinion, we determine what those lasting effects are. They could be good. They could be bad.
Right.
They could be just about anything. But to me, it's the officer himself that decides what he's going to make of it. And that's what 1078 kind of came from, is from that being in a shooting and wanting to provide a nexus or a way in a community for guys that have been through shootings to kind of navigate it. So hopefully there's positive things rather than negative things coming from these shootings, because as difficult as a shooting may be and going through shooting may be and taking someone's life may be, there are positive things that could come from them. That can come from that. There's positive things that can come from literally any situation, and we determine how we perceive and how we move forward. So,
no, 100%, man. We all have personal responsibility. I mean, I never, like, even when I talk about the mental health stuff, like, I'm going to tell you what PTS and PTSD looks like. You're never walking away from here, and don't use me as an excuse and say, "Well, I heard Travis say this, and this is why I'm like that." That's fine. I'm telling you why these things may affect you in this way, but at the end of the day, I have the personal responsibility to not go down that road. I had the personal responsibility to not abuse alcohol, but I chose that because I wasn't navigating it correctly. So we have. It's all in how we deal with those challenges that comes along.
So how long did you spend at the hospital with that guy?
I think I was there for about a week assignment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep,
and he ended up pulling through?
He did, man. He came off. He ultimately comes back to work. He had to go to rehab, and he comes back to work, but he didn't stay on for very long because he never fully recovered. So he ended up having to take retirement. So, and then same thing with Lieutenant. He kept trying to come back, but the shot in the shoulder just blew up the joint, and multiple surgeries, and just never got full use, couldn't raise it, like he should or anything like that. But he ultimately had to retire as well.
Yeah, that'd be a difficult thing to come back from mentally and physically. Yeah. Like facing that every day. Yeah. We do traffic stops all the time.
Right.
Facing that every day that'd be a difficult one. We're in Michigan. Do you know where Berrien Center is?
Yeah, it's over by Flint, I believe. Yeah. East side.
It's or Niles.
Yeah.
You know where
Niles.
Is?
Yeah, Niles is southwest. Yeah. Yep.
I went to canine school there.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it was like I tell everybody it was like Kentucky and Florida met each other.
Okay. Yep. Because the water.
It's like the lake's right there.
Yeah.
The lake's right there. So everybody always wants to do lake stuff, but it's like it's pretty country.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Niles isn't all that country. It's a different world, but So interesting connection, but so kind of walk me through your time at the sheriff's department.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just kept pushing through, man. I ultimately ended up promoting. With a small department like that, in comparison to Mesa, it's kind of like the sheriff and the undersheriff, they like who they like, and hey, we'd like you to test for sergeant, come do an interview. And It was kind of difficult, I'll be honest with you, because I was younger. I would have, let's see, what year did I promote? I probably only had maybe 4 years on, 5 years tops, and promoted to sergeant. There was a lot of senior people there that were like, kind of changed their, they thought I was, the ass kicker or whatever. But I mean, it just came down to I was a hard charger. I pushed it, showed up to work every day, did what they expected, and just trying to take bad people to jail. And that's what they like. So I ended up promoting. I was an FTO supervisor. Ultimately got tasked when I promoted that's when we were tasked to stand up this quick reaction force or containment team. So we did that, myself and another sergeant, and just kept pushing along. I'll be honest with you, I had pretty big aspirations after I promoted to sergeant. I was going to stay there and ultimately want to be the sheriff. That was the route I was going down, but never really lost the it to go work big city policing. And ultimately, I can tell you that's why I went to Mesa. But yeah, worked through there. 2005 is when I got into my only officer-involved shooting, where I was the one, pulling the trigger. Pretty big experience. I don't know. I assume it's like this a lot of places, but our sheriff at the time, the sheriff's department, like, hey, if there's no calls for service, going on right now, be doing traffic. Or another thing I'd like you to do is we would grab a warrant list every week from the county prosecutor's office. Like, hey, go arrest these people on warrants. And so we would do that. 2 or 3 of us would go to residences where this person lived, trying to, get people on their warrants. And there was a warrant for a kid. He was 18 years old that had not appeared for a drunk driving preliminary hearing case. And so the judge issued a warrant for his arrest. And the deputy that I was with, he knew this kid. This deputy had grown up in the area, knew this guy, and was like, hey, I know his name was Zach Blett. Said, I know him, and let's go out there. And it was on a dirt road in the middle of cornfields. And so we went fully marked patrol cars, full uniforms, go on. I think it was like about 9 o'clock at night, something like that. Knock on this old farmhouse door and like a mud room. I assume you know what that is, like a mud room going to this old farmhouse. Mm-hmm. And the suspect comes to the door right away. But right away, he won't open the door all the way. There's a pit bull inside going crazy. The deputy I was with, he was the contact officer. I was the cover officer, so kind of off back outside of him. And I'm thinking in my head, like, we're going to have to shoot this damn dog. This dog is an idiot. Like, it's going to come out at us. And about that time, I see an individual come to a window that was off to my left, and it turned out to be the window of the farmhouse that was overlooking the sink, so overlooking their property as well. This dude came to the window, old guy, long gray hair, long gray beard, but just, how it is when someone looks at you and you're like, hey, that person's not comprehending what they're seeing right now. Just kind of zombie looking. At a point, I even flashed my light at him. Like, hey, and I'm in uniform. So he abruptly leaves that window, and I tell the deputy that was with me, his name was Brent, and I say, hey, there's a guy in the window, I don't know who that is. And he's like, hey, I think that's Zach's dad. And about that time, the door opens up, and about 6 feet in the house, that individual I saw was standing there with a 1911 pointed at us. So didn't drop the weapon. The deputy in front of me just kind of goes down to take cover. And as I'm going, down kind of over his back, I had drawn and end up shooting and killing him. So.
Did he get any rounds off on you guys?
He's not. The shitty side to it, obviously I would do the same thing all over again, but dude is Vietnam vet, kind of a out there Vietnam vet, to where during like local parades and stuff, he'd have his friends take him around in like a bamboo cage to bring awareness to that there were still prisoners of war in Vietnam, and had severe PTSD, was legally deaf, legally blind, would take a shit ton of Ambien to try to sleep. And that night, did not put his glasses on, did put his hearing aids in, and had taken a shit ton of Ambien based on his wife's interview after the shooting. So he probably didn't even know who we were, man. And then his son that we were there to arrest, he tells in the interview, said, yeah, my dad pulls a gun on me all the time, and I have to talk him down to like, hey, Dad, it's me, getting him to like snap out of it. And then other neighbors had talked about, he would show up in the cornfield and address us on the tractor with his gun and just kind of out of it. So dude was probably just struggling, man. And unfortunately, our paths crossed that night, and I did what I had to do. So, pretty big deal, because it was a controversial shooting from the standpoint a lot of anti-government people came out of the woodwork, and they were actually threatening myself and my family. We actually had to take off out of the house for a while because people were coming by our house, making threats they were going to kill us. So big deal.
Is that a pretty big thing in Michigan? Is like anti-government groups?
There's definitely a faction of that. I wouldn't. We can go the gamut to constitutionalists, we had some of those, we would have a group of individuals there we'd make a traffic stop on because their plates were expired or they didn't have a plate, and they're like, no, we don't have to have plates. We don't believe in the Constitution of the United States. And
I'm traveling.
Totally.
I got that a lot.
Bullshit. Yeah.
I'm traveling. Yep. I'm not driving. I'm traveling.
Exact. Traveling. We've had them try to arrest us before. Like, oh, I'm going to arrest you. Like, oh, you are? Okay. Let's see how this goes. So just a small faction. But they all come out of the woodwork when something like this happens. So I was cleared criminally within a couple days, back to work. Again, nothing real with mental health. But the civil suit lasted for 5 years, even into me going to Mesa, back and forth, deposition. I thought we were going to take it to trial. We had everything good to go, because the kid had lied and said that we pushed our way into the house, and I confronted the dad way inside the house where he had dropped dead. And that wasn't the case, and it was an easy case to me because my shell casings were back in the mudroom where we were. So I'm like, this is easy. My shell casings are here. He said the shooting happened inside. That can't be. And, of course, the attorney is like, yep, we got this. Well, then the commissioners, like they do, when they're making a business decision, like, let's just pay him out. They ultimately paid him out $3 million to the family. So, yeah.
$3 million, man, that's a lot of money. Were you married or?
I was married to my first wife, and just had. So my oldest he was only about 6 weeks old at the time.
Do you remember making that phone call back to your wife saying that you were involved in a shooting?
Man, I do. I know another sergeant arrived on scene and gave me told me, you better call your wife. I did that. I'm trying to think if she answered. I honestly can't remember, or someone had to go to the house. I can't remember how that all went down, to be honest with you.
That's where kind of things set in for me after my shooting, where I went from being like policeman Matt to husband and dad Matt. There's a big separation between the mindsets of those two people. And that's kind of where I jumped back into dad Matt and husband Matt. Do you remember like the first night, like going back home, what your sleep patterns were like or anything like that?
I do. So I don't think I got home till I remember the sun had come up. So came back home. I drank a little bit and then tried to sleep and just could not sleep and had a raging headache. It was not good, people have asked me this before. It took me a couple days to even try to get a few hours sleep because there's just a lot going on. You started hearing all this controversial stuff. The news was all over at one point. Some asshole, anti-cop news reporter, I could get a knock on the door and I literally have my son in my arms. I opened it up and he's there freaking with a camera wanting to get an interview. So it was a lot, man, that, again, as I look back, and the department, again, we didn't, no one was doing anything mental health related back then, but like, hey, Travis, this is a rough one. Let's get you some assistance. I did have to go and do the whole fit for duty interview, but that was like, tell the guy you're not drinking too much, you're sleeping fine, you're ready to go back to work, check. And he signed the paper and I'm good to go. So
Yeah,
I did that.
Those things are a joke.
Yeah, exactly. So just a lot of fog associated with it, and it was, again, how do they prepare you for that? That like, hey, I just got cleared criminally. The county prosecutor says I'm good to go. But not everyone, there's a group of people attacking me saying that this was bullshit. So what's happening here? So.
Yeah. How long were you out of work?
Not long, man. I think, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days, and I was back. I was ready to come back. I want to come back. I was like, yeah, get me back now. So. Yeah,
I kind of have mixed feelings about that one because I was out for quite some time. I was out for until everything got cleared by the prosecutor, which takes, we have like a team that comes in and does the whole investigation and everything. It was like 3 to 4 weeks, and I needed to get back to work. Yeah. Like I needed to get back to some type of schedule and routine. Yep. Now 3 shifts, maybe that's a little
too much.
Quick. Yeah. Maybe 3 shifts is a little too fast. Doesn't really allow your brain all that much time to process everything. And but also at the same time, 3 to 4 weeks is too long to be at home sitting and waiting. Yep. And that was by the end of it, I was more anxious about getting cleared and more anxious about going back to work than I was about anything else. I just wanted to get back on the horse and prove to myself that I could go back and do it. Because I was you never really know how you're going to react to that level of stress again. What's going to happen every time, I'm a canine handler and I put myself in really stressful, dangerous environments. Like what's going to happen? How's my decision making going to be? Am I going to make the right decisions? And so it was good for me to get back. My first night back, we had a shooting. So it was like 4 hours after coming back to work, I'm standing on a barricade calling people out. I'm like, oh, okay, well, nobody's going to believe that this is the truth. If this goes sideways, nobody's going to believe that my first day back after 4 weeks off, I end up getting to another shooting. But it was almost like baptism by fire, and I'm happy that it happened that way because it forced me to trust myself again, like trust my decision-making process and everything else.
Yeah, I think that's a case-by-case basis. Like, I mean, I've heard what you're saying, definitely. I think with larger departments, there's a lot of flexibility to where even getting someone back to send them out to training, let them go be with this unit to help them, just to get their feet wet, or are they ready to come back? I have seen, and I have many friends that have been in multiple officer-involved shootings, and maybe the first couple, they're like, yeah, I'm ready to come back now, but then as time goes on, they're like, no, I need a little bit more time. Like, I'm just trying to wrap my head around everything, and they're a little bit better equipped knowing the whole circumstance. They can have that time away and use it to their advantage, if that makes sense, to just kind of have a reset, love on their family, whatever that looks like to them. So the problem is the inconsistency based on administrations, in my opinion. So I was doing something in Ohio with a department, and I had a couple SWAT guys that were talking to me about the inconsistencies. And one of them, yep, I was allowed to come back in 2 weeks. The other one, it's been 3 months and I'm still off, and they won't tell me why. So the problem we have with that, then obviously you can just understand what happens to us mentally. Why were they able to come back after 2 weeks? Both of our shootings are legit. What's the difference? And to come to find out, talking to some supervisors that were willing to talk, he's had a little bit more use of force stuff. So the department's like, hey, we got to, pull him off away from the public for a while. And I'm like, man, that is not a good thing. Your hard charges are going to be in a ton of use of force. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then with the caveat of, if needed, a couple more weeks or whatever that looks like, you know what I mean? But I need to know going to that shooting what that looks like.
What's up, guys? Thanks for hanging in there for the episode. As you can tell, there's more from this guest, and we'll see you next week. The 1078 Project podcast is proudly sponsored by Deemed Fit. Deemed Fit is an activewear and a leisure company created for first responders. Be a part of their movement to instill confidence, motivation, and a willingness to keep pushing forward.
Deemed Fit is a first responder-owned company looking to help first responders and their friends stay as physically and mentally fit as possible. Stay deemed fit.